In this episode, we speak with Stephanie Campbell, an astronomy PhD student at the University of St Andrews. We discuss their time at St Andrews, as well as their work in diversity and outreach in astronomy, such as being the Regional Liaison for the International Society of Non-Binary Scientists. Enjoy listening. You are listening to Insight, the University of St Andrews Physics Society's podcast. Join us as we journey into the world of St Andrews academics, discovering their passions, inspirations, and motivations.
Hello everyone, today's interview is with Stephanie Campbell from the University of St Andrews Physics and Astronomy Department. Welcome, Stephanie.
Lovely to be here.
Thanks for joining us. Well, why don't we get stuck in? I guess to start off, it'd be great if you could tell us your positions here at St Andrews.
Yeah, so I am currently a third-year PhD student studying astronomy at the University of St Andrews. I work with Anne-Marie Weijsmans looking at dynamical models, and alongside that role I also stand on the Quality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee in the department, and a few other roles and sort of public engagement things alongside.
And I guess if you could give us a brief summary of your path into those positions.
Yeah, so I went to school in Kirkcaldy in Fife. Not really most known for people ending up in sort of higher education positions. I think we have a sort of low income area, low uptake to higher education. Finished my time at school and I headed to Edinburgh to do a 5-year undergraduate master's in physics. And about halfway through that, I remember we got, at the end of third year, the option to specialise in astronomy. And I chose to specialise in astronomy because otherwise I would have had to do labs every week, which I didn't enjoy labs. So I was like, cut my losses and I guess I'll do this astronomy stuff, which isn't quite the sort of fun origin story that people want it to be. But then found out I actually quite enjoyed it. Finished up my master's and applied for some PhD positions. Kind of didn't know whether I would get offers anywhere. Ended up getting offers in Edinburgh and St Andrews and Durham and Liverpool. Saw that I got on really well with Anne-Marie, the supervisor in St Andrews, but personally didn't want to live in St Andrews. So together we came to an arrangement where I could continue to live in Edinburgh and work in St Andrews. So sort of that's where I started off my research here. And then as I've spent my time in the department, sort of different opportunities came up relating to equality, diversity and inclusion and relating to public engagement and different roles, and just sort of taking the opportunities that come along.
Brilliant. Yeah, again, what was it specifically, do you think, that you preferred about living in Edinburgh to St Andrews?
I think sort of familiarity, because obviously I was here for my undergrad, but also just definitely a city person. And I think having grown up in Kirkcaldy so close to St Andrews, felt strange to go back. Yeah.
No, that's brilliant. Well, I guess maybe then if you go into a bit more detail about what exactly your research is you're doing here.
Yeah, so I create dynamical models of other galaxies to look at sort of their mass content and specifically how much dark matter is in those galaxies. So if you measure the velocities of the stars in other galaxies, you can see how fast they're moving around, and that'll hopefully only be due to gravity. So I can look at how they are moving, and then using what we know about how gravity works, I can work out how they should be moving if there was only normal matter there, because we can look at images and see how much normal matter is there. And obviously we, spoiler alert, we find that they don't move the way that we expect them to. And comparing how they do move to how they should move sort of tells us how much dark matter is there. And I can sort of chuck in lots of different shapes and sizes of dark matter distributions to work out which one fits the data best. And usually that's just done with data from stars. But if we want to really probe sort of dark matter where it's most dominant, we want more information from beyond where the stars reach. So out there's cold hydrogen gas, which is also rotating due to gravity. So I can use radio data to look at how that part is affected and get a little bit extra information to make the models more accurate. So yeah, that's what I do day to day.
That sounds really interesting. So is there maybe anything specific about the day-to-day research that you particularly enjoy?
I do sort of enjoy, I guess dark matter is kind of a buzzword at the moment, because it's, I feel like most people have heard the term, but they think it's something that's really, really difficult and impossible, and only really, really smart people can understand it. And I enjoy sort of being able to talk about what I do and kind of demystify it. I think people get a lot of reward in themselves in sort of realizing that they can also just understand this stuff, because it's, at the end of the day, it's just stuff, even though it's a big buzzword. We don't need to be outrageously smart to do what I do. It's just kind of following along the little path and seeing where you end up.
Yeah, it's certainly a point of massive public interest at the moment. Definitely a vector for that. I guess that probably ties in with something else I wanted to ask, which is, I noticed you're the lead for the St Andrews Mobile Planetarium, and I imagine a component of that is obviously talking to people about this kind of research and explaining it to them. So could you maybe tell us what exactly the Mobile Planetarium is and what you do there?
I guess in pre-pandemic times, the Mobile Planetarium fit its name a bit better. So the department has, I guess, like a large inflatable dome. So just a big tent, black tent, and you stick a fan in one side so it inflates in a big dome, and you can have about 10 to 20 people sit inside it. And then they also have a very specific special projection machine. There's actually two. There's one that can do constellations, and there's one that just shows the stars. And it'll show where the stars are in the sky that night, and also where the planets are. So prior to the pandemic, in fact, just 1 week before the pandemic, I was in that tent with a lot of children. We would go into the tent and sort of show our audience what would be in the night sky that night, go through some constellations, talk a bit about different planets, and sort of discuss what they wanted to know about space. And useful things like finding the North Star and how you can use that to navigate and sort of things like that. Obviously, things changed a little bit over the last few years, which was also when I inherited the role of being the lead. And it became, evident that there might be quite a while before we're allowed to crawl into a tent with a bunch of children or adults or anyone. So I thought it was worthwhile to try and adapt the planetarium to work without having to crawl in a tent, which in some ways sort of takes away some of the excitement, because I think the kids really love going into like an interesting environment and being completely immersed. I started using just Stellarium on my laptop. That's a piece of software that shows you the constellations in the night sky, and just sort of doing stuff through Zoom, doing stuff virtually, as I think many of us are used to by this point. And I found that you could reach sort of a much wider audience. You can reach people further away, because with the mobile planetarium, we were obviously limited by how far we can afford petrol to go and drive it to school. So yeah, sort of doing that. And I also found that Stellarium gives you a bit more information, because if you see, Mars has just come up above the horizon, you can zoom in and sort of seamlessly go from Mars being a little red dot to seeing sort of orbiter images of Mars. And I think it gives sort of an extra dimension to the kids to sort of see things, what they look like in the sky, and then what they look like in the pictures that they know. There's definitely benefits to doing it virtually, even though there's the downside of it not being quite as immersive. So I think moving forward, I'm wondering how we can maybe adapt the physical dome so that we could have those Stellarium images in there, and then see if we can kind of blend the two together going forward.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine both those things being really useful for kids. I was just wondering what kind of ages are the kids that you've been targeting so far with this?
So I've done primary school shows where they're sort of 5, in which case we'll sort of do more like stories of constellations. And the useful thing about Stellarium is, of course, you can show the artwork that shows them the constellations instead of just a bunch of dots and lines. But yeah, I've done everything up to adults. You can take it to sort of science festivals, and the parents will come in, and it's really useful to sort of adapt from, here's the constellations and the stories about them and get them interested in that end, to sort of all the way up to, with Stellarium, I can show them Andromeda and explain how a galaxy works and talk about how my research works. And their favorite trick is when I press a couple buttons and you change your point of view from being on Earth to being on Mars, looking places. They like that trick.
Yeah. No, that's good. Yeah, I guess sort of related to that, what do you think are really important things to sort of give to the younger generation to sort of inspire them into, I guess, physics, but also into astronomy? What are things to focus on when you're doing that kind of outreach?
I think it's because space and stuff like that is something that kids are exposed to. I don't think you can find a kid anywhere that hasn't seen a picture of another planet and sort of understand it with those little touch points. And, they can see the stars, they can see what Mars looks like. And I think sort of bringing those things together and sort of getting rid of the kind of in-between part of like, there's this giant other planet and it's red versus there's that little red dot in the sky, and kind of bringing them all together. And again, the same way I sort of speak about my research, just kind of showing them that they can understand it too. Because I think space is studied by these big geniuses who are so smart that no one can ever understand what they do. And it's, no, we are all pretty normal people. And like everyone can understand it if someone explains it to them well enough, I reckon. Which I think is sort of, yeah, what we need to sort of focus on. Get them excited about it and bridge those gaps and focus on sort of the touch points that they'll already have from just existing in the world.
I think one thing that makes this kind of thing even more important nowadays, with things like the mobile planetarium, is, you know, I grew up in London, and you essentially can see none of the stars ever in London. I barely knew what a star was until I moved to St Andrews. So I think, and obviously you can see them a bit better here, but it's still not exceptional. I imagine probably in Edinburgh especially. So it's really important to, I think, give people that, because it's really inspiring to see stars the way they are. And if you don't have an opportunity to see that as often, seeing something, especially in a tactile nature such as the tent, I imagine is really impactful.
Yeah, and just kind of connecting, you know, the stuff that they see on TV with the stuff that they see around them, and kind of showing them how those things are the same things and connect, I think is really important. Because I think it's quite easy to understand both things, but as sort of separate things, if that makes sense, without sort of seeing how they are the same.
Yeah, no, of course. So in a similar vein of outreach, but focusing on a different community, I noticed you're on the Committee for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion in the Physics Department. And so what's your role there, and what do they kind of do within the department?
So yeah, we cover a lot of things. We meet every so often, and we do sort of everything from working out how to better monitor the sort of demographics and diversity in the department, so that we can sort of understand where we're at and what needs improved. Because the university's own information that they collect on that has some gaps in it. So quite a lot of it is sort of finding surveys and ways that we can collect that information in a better way in our own department. And then once we have that information, looking at where the gaps are and what needs to change, and then looking at sort of the policy changes that can make a difference to that. Whether that's making the environment more accessible and welcoming for the people who are already here, or sort of changing how we attract different groups to apply and how to retain different groups in astronomy going forward. Because I don't think it's much of a secret that physics and astronomy maybe has a slight issue with diversity and sort of different groups being underrepresented in our field. And it's, you know, something that is on everyone's radar, but I think a lot of departments will say that it's something that they care about and that they're trying to improve, and then that's kind of that, and there's not sort of much concrete evidence for how they're doing that. Because yeah, it's definitely, again, similar to dark matter, it's a buzzword. And a lot of departments will sort of throw out that buzzword because it's what they're meant to do, but then sort of not actually actively tackle it. So yeah, I think for me, equality, diversity, and inclusion, whether you're an undergrad or a professor, everyone's kind of either training to become, or they are still going through professional development to continue to be a researcher in the world. And I think to exist as a researcher in the world, part of that training or professional development also has to be how to, you know, exist in the world with other people. So I think it's very important that it's not something that's, you know, I study physics and also there's equality, diversity and inclusion stuff. I think it kind of has to be an essential part of our training to become researchers, which I think is very important, but I think it's also often missed out. It's kind of this sort of extra separate thing that people tack on and do on the side, but I think it should be part of sort of all of our jobs. And I think, you know, specifically, there is an issue with sort of the groups who are underrepresented being the groups who do the ED&I work. And obviously that's a problem within itself. So yeah, I reckon it's something that everyone's aware of, but I think a lot of people just don't know how to change it. I don't think very often it's not an issue of people not seeing that there's a problem. It's more just sort of, it's such a big issue that no one knows how to tackle it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's something that improves things for everyone. Something that I stand by is if we can make our department, our field, welcoming and accessible and attainable and attractive to a black trans woman who's disabled from immigrated from another country and isn't Christian, if we can make our field accessible, welcoming, attractive and attainable to that person, then the rest of it's done the work. Because I think physics and astronomy is focused for a long time on, you know, there's not enough women in astronomy, so we're going to make things better for women in astronomy. That hasn't really helped this hypothetical individual. So we have to kind of tackle all of it together. We can't kind of do one piece and then the other. So that's kind of the view that I have on how EDI stuff should work. And I think I managed to bring a bit of that to the committee in my time on there, which is good to see.
No, that's brilliant. Yeah, I think you're completely right. There's particularly physics as a field. There is this really strong sort of stereotype of the kind of person that does physics, and I think that's a really important thing that we need to break, even just in the spirit of science, which is so collaborative and so, you need diversity within the field to really get the most out. So it's an incredibly important issue. And I think another thing you're doing, which is sort of related to this, is I saw that you're the regional liaison for the International Society of Non-Binary Scientists. And so I guess I was just wondering, what is their general mission, as well as your role as, I think it's regional liaison for Scotland, isn't it? So it's quite a wide role.
Yeah, so I'm non-binary myself, and made the choice a couple of years ago to become open about that in the department, which I wasn't sure about, because to my knowledge at the time, I was the only person who was even talking about those issues, let alone being open about it in the department. And I think that's part of what the society does, because being the only non-binary person in your department makes it feel like such a struggle. Sort of very much feeling like you are the only one who understands those issues, you're the only one who cares about those issues, and you're the only one who's having the experience that you're having, was definitely where I was at and assumed was the case. So when I discovered the International Society for Non-Binary Scientists, I think they had about 300 members. So that's across the world. Yeah. That's everywhere from undergraduates to professors. And, it's across all the sciences, including some social sciences. And sort of found that community, which was a step to begin with, of like, wow, there's other people out there who are, dealing with the same stuff that I'm dealing with. Many of them were also astronomers, quite a strong representation in astronomy. But I was still, this is separate from my work, and my department is just not included in any of this. So I think when I first decided to become a liaison, I think there were 3 members in Scotland. And I started off being like, there's 3 members in Scotland, maybe there's only 3 non-binary scientists in Scotland. That seems like a reasonable number. So in my role, I set out to just kind of raise the awareness of the society in Scotland. I emailed every single LGBT society at every university in Scotland. And then I also contacted every single LGBT staff network in every university in Scotland, just to kind of put the information out there and see whether there was anyone else, because 3 seemed like a solid number. I think we now have 13 Scottish members, which is still a small number, but a lot more than 3. And my sort of plan now is to hopefully have sort of some regional events. So at the minute, the society runs events internationally, mostly online, which is lovely and great, but it doesn't sort of have that local attachment to it. You're sort of building a network, but it feels very separate from the world you live in. So I think sort of moving forward, trying to plan sort of regional events in Scotland so that we can all sort of meet each other and network and get the advice and the support is where I'm heading. So yeah, that's kind of also what the society's aims are. It's to sort of have a group that represents us. I mean, the people I've met through the society, I go to for sort of personal advice, career advice. We share sort of job adverts that people think are supportive. We also maybe let other people know if we've found a department which is not supportive, so that people in the future know that that's not a sort of safe place for them to end up in, and just kind of share sort of best practices and advice, etc., to kind of improve all of our departments and improve the way that we exist in our departments, and just sort of have that community there to sort of support each other as well. So yeah, it's a very, very good society. We are now at 597 members compared to the 300 or so when I first became a member. So it's growing, which is crazy to see.
Yeah, that's really brilliant. What kind of locations do they tend to be in?
We have a problem at the moment because whenever we try to have a meeting, we can never find a time that suits every time zone. Because there's people in India, there's people in China and Japan, there's people in Australia, there's people in the States. It's I think we would struggle to find a continent that wasn't represented.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's probably an encouraging problem to have, to be honest.
Yeah, and by having sort of regional liaisons, we can sort of orient things to tackle specific needs in that region. Because obviously in the UK and the States, it is safe-ish to be open about your identity. In India, it is not. So there's very different needs that need to be sort of tailored to, and different ways to advertise. Because obviously if I send out an email and say, can you advertise this in your department? People are going to advertise in the department. In India, people can be, in trouble for advertising the department. They can sort of encounter problems in their own personal life for being open and attached to different groups. And that's also obviously in other countries as well. So sort of regional work like that is very important. And now that we've got enough members everywhere, it's a bit more feasible.
I think just, connecting the global community is a really important thing to be doing. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that really appreciate that. From your perspective, how do you think, I guess you've already touched on how non-binary and trans identities are represented in science, but what kind of extent do you think people in those communities are impacted by how they identify sort of in their career?
I think it is in the UK improving. Sort of very practical things that used to be problems. So, for example, if you published in a journal under your dead name and then you changed your name, journals would not have a policy to allow you to do a name change retroactively. So your option then would be to, lose all of the papers that you published prior to your name change and just not have them associated with you anymore, or to have to, publicize the fact that that used to be your name, which is not a comfortable thing for people. And over the last few years, people in the community have created a whole database on which journals, I think it started on Twitter, they sort of created a spreadsheet on which journals had positive policies and which ones didn't. And when a journal didn't have a positive policy, everyone would go and ask them to change their policy. So I think it's now the majority of journals in physics and astronomy at least have trans-inclusive name change policies. So things like that are sort of very practical steps in representation. And at the minute, there are sort of specific events that tailor to our community. I know that Strathclyde was the host of the LGBTQ Steminar, which was a conference just for LGBTQ scientists to come and sort of present their information, their research, to network a little bit and just to sort of celebrate the work that we all do. And I think events like that allow us to have representation in our own community, but sort of more recently have become more outwardly facing and sort of lets everyone else know about the sort of work that we do. So I think there are difficulties in terms of how society in a larger way are sort of dealing with things. I think that our field is doing better than society at large. I don't think that's a very high bar, if I'm honest. It is kind of the case that as these topics are more and more in the news, A, I read the news less because it is difficult to read at times, and B, people are more inclined to wade in with opinions that they never had to have before, which is uncomfortable for a lot of people. But I think in general, our field is improving with sort of understanding how to approach these things, but the problems are still there, and it is often sort of falling on trans and non-binary people themselves to sort of tackle the problems, which is still a problem, but I guess it's better than not being listened to at all. And it is kind of that trade-off of, doing what we can individually to improve things, but then working out at what cost that is to yourself, because it is exhausting and it is tiring and it is just a whole extra part of your job that no one else has to kind of tackle. But I do know that there are a lot of very good allies in our department, at least, who are very conscious of, extra workload stuff that I take on just because of who I am, and offer help and support with that. And because large societies such as the International Society of Non-Binary Scientists exist, there is that sort of external support group out there where we can kind of have a rant about our individual sort of experiences, and it also allows us to sort of keep track of maybe departments or people who are not as supportive as they maybe should be, and give people the option to avoid having to deal with that in their careers. So people sort of my age coming up just now would all have, been the only person in their department, might have chosen not to be open, and, just sort of had to do it themselves. And it is now at a point where, because we've kind of gone through that and pushed for that, the people who are coming up behind us are having a slightly easier time, and that's hopefully how it continues to be. Through the International Society of Non-Binary Scientists, I actually had an email from, I think, a sixth form student in England who was non-binary, and they said, I don't think you'll even answer my email, but I wondered if I could ask you some questions. And I said, of course I'm going to answer your email. I'm a lot less busy than you seem to think I am. So yeah, sort of could be there to give them that advice and sort of answer their questions and kind of just support them and be that sort of mentor, which sort of people my age never had, which is a really nice way to see things change. But I hope things could change faster, and it would be a lot easier. The rest of society would maybe let that happen too.
Yeah. I guess building on what you were saying before, do you have any particular advice for allies, both students and staff members, I guess, particularly within STEM, but maybe in the wider world as well, as to sort of how to make that role easier within the working world? And
so something that I sort of stand by quite often is, I know that sort of the buzzword around it is to, oh my goodness, I've forgotten my own buzzwords. Listen, learn, and advocate is kind of the way that it's put. And at the minute, I'm pushing quite strongly for it to become learn, then listen, then advocate. Because we are at a point where, in the UK at least, all that information is out there, and you can learn an awful lot if you sort of take the time, which you should take, and put in the effort that you should maybe put in to sort of learn about those things yourself. And only then do you have to kind of approach us and ask us questions and listen to us about it. Because it's, I love talking. I love the sound of my own voice. I can talk about it for ages, but it is not useful time to me to keep sort of teaching people the same things over and over. So I really want to change so that people can sort of find the resources that exist out there already, learn off their own backs first, and sort of then come and ask us about things from that sort of base foundation. And then once they sort of are at that point, advocate for the changes that need to happen. And those can be small changes. And if it starts as, one or two people earlier in their career pushing for small changes, then more and more people higher up sort of become more educated on these issues. And then it's that upward pressure that is going to sort of change things higher up, all the way up to, UK government policy kind of stuff eventually. And it is sort of starting from the bottom and working our way up just to kind of educate people and help them understand a bit more sort of what to do and how to change things.
Yeah, that's I guess a really good way it's moving forward. You're right that science is an incredibly competitive field, and so I can imagine that having such a large component of work which just isn't necessarily related to your research is a massive pressure that I guess people outside those communities just don't have in the most part.
I mean, as an example, there was a certain email from the principal a few months ago, which for most people was just a standard email, but for people who maybe see this day to day, contained a lot of buzzwords in there that perhaps the principal didn't even know were present in them. And I, from that email, have taken hours writing responses, and I've had 2 meetings with Sally Mapstone in person to discuss, following on from, that's, at the end of the day, that's work that no one else has to do. So Sally Mapstone frames it as she's taken the time to listen, but it's kind of, I wish I didn't have to take the time to talk again about things that are already out there. So it's just sort of those things. For most people, that was an email they could just kind of skim, read, and discard. And I don't think people quite understand just how much extra pressure is there.
No, that's a brilliant point. I think a lot of people are going to benefit from hearing that. Thanks a lot. I guess moving on a bit more to yourself. I was just wondering, do you have any hobbies that you like to do in your free time?
Yeah. Despite everything I've just said, I do have a fair amount of free time. I'm very, very strict with a 9-to-5 and a work-life balance, and I think everyone should be. So during the summer, it hits 5 p.m. and I go on my regular, if the weather is good, I go on my regular 1-hour woodland walk through the city to Wardie Bay, which is an urban beach in the middle of Edinburgh. And I go for a swim in the sea, which during the summer is nice and pleasant. But this year, my goal is to do it once every calendar month. And it's April, so the last few calendar months have been a bit less pleasant than the summer ones. But we are getting there now. It's a little bit less of a task. So I head over there, go for a swim. And during the summer, I normally walk back via the climbing wall. I do a lot of bouldering, and I spend a few hours there bouldering at the gym, which is another place where I used to be the only non-binary person present. And I pushed for them to make one of their toilets gender neutral, which then made me feel that it was a comfortable place where I could bring other non-binary trans friends. And there's a whole group of us that go fairly regularly and I guess take over the climbing wall. And I'm comfortable enough that it is my space, that if anyone was to kick up a fuss about it, it's my space to kind of feel comfortable enforcing that that's not okay, and sort of allowing my friends to also feel that that's a space that they can exist comfortably in. So yeah, bouldering, swimming. I do a lot of painting these days. I've started plein air painting, so you take all the painting stuff outside with you and like paint the landscape right in front of you, which again during the winter a bit difficult with cold hands, but makes you paint a bit faster.
I used to do a bit of art myself, but not so much recently, I guess. But I've always wanted to sit outside and paint. I feel like it'd be a very relaxing way to spend a few hours.
Yeah, it's definitely a nice way to spend time. I have a friend who joins me on that every so often, and it's nice to just kind of spend time together with a task to do, and kind of talk about it as we do it. Very nice.
Yeah, so something else I saw that you do in your free time, which I thought seemed like quite a lot of fun, is you run an Instagram account, The Art of the STEM Mistake.
I do.
So perhaps you could tell us a bit about what gave you the idea for that, and then how that's going.
So I started that during my undergrad, because a group of us, there were 4 or 5 of us, who were struggling our way through the last few months of our undergrad, and we're trying to run our codes to write, make a plot, which I'm sure we all know how that feels when you hit enter and you wait a minute and the plot pops up and you've somehow done something ridiculous, and it doesn't make any sense, and there's about 10 different dimensions to the data that you didn't think were there or shouldn't have been there, and it's just absolute nonsense. And we began to sort of laugh and joke about, scientifically nonsense, but from an art perspective, it can be quite appealing. And I started this Instagram account, which admittedly I am bad at updating. My friends used to submit their failed plots to me. I've got a whole folder of them now. They're still sending me them now that they're all doing PhDs. Because if you're an undergrad out there who is hitting enter to make a plot and it's coming out as nonsense, let me tell you that still happens to us, even far, far into PhD. So I would start posting those failed plots to Instagram and sort of put some kind of jokey caption about how it evokes some sort of emotion, etc. Because I think it is something that no one in science talks about enough, is just how many times you make a silly mistake or just something ridiculous, and it happens to all of us, but it makes everyone no one talks about it, so everyone feels like they're the only one who ever makes a ridiculous plot by accident. I spent a while making my dynamical models and I couldn't work out why things were going wrong, because my code puts in is meant to run a Markov chain Monte Carlo simulation where it does like 30,000 steps or whatever, and each time it'll put in theory, one shaper size of dark matter halo, compare it to the data, see how accurate it is, then swap in for another dark matter halo, see how close that is to the data, evaluate it, and then do that over and over. I couldn't work out why mine was so ridiculously just wrong, and it seemed if I ran a short chain, so sort of 10 steps, it seemed reasonable, but if I ran the long chain, it started just behaving really strangely. I spent about a whole week wondering what it was, and then I finally looked at the numbers, which you would think would be something I did at the start, but I don't. I just looked at the pretty line, and I found that I was not, in fact, swapping in dark matter halos. I was adding more and more. So when I looked at the numbers, the model galaxy that I had made weighed more than the entire universe.
Amazing.
The stars were rotating at a speed far greater than the speed of light. In fact, it was close to the maximum number that Python can deal with. I think it's about 10 to the 140. And I realized that I'd broken every rule in physics. And it's at that point I remembered that it just happens all the time. It's what everyone does. I think most of our time, whether we're an undergrad or a professor, is spent making mistakes. And I think that Instagram account, as well as sort of being fun and nice to look at, also just kind of, I hope, acts as a reminder to people that we're all just out here making mistakes all the time. And if everyone spoke about it more, everyone would feel a lot less weird about it. Because it takes a lot of mistakes before you end up getting something right. That's just how it works. Same with paintings, I guess.
No, it's true. I mean, they do look particularly artistic, but I guess you're right. And the only time you do really hear about mistakes are when it's like, the cosmological constant and turns out it wasn't a mistake. It was amazing. So it is nice to hear that there's a lot of time wasted, which a lot of, not time wasted, I guess, just still learning, but mistakes made that sort of take up your life?
Yeah, I think it's something that my partner at the time said to me about painting when they were teaching me how to paint. They said, oh, you have to, I said, oh, this painting's rubbish. And they said, oh, well, you have to do a set number of 100 of rubbish paintings for every good one. And I sort of said, no, I'm just going to do the good ones, which it's not possible. So for every sort of good scientific piece of work that you're going to do, you're going to spend a lot of time doing all the rubbish ones, but that's just part and package of what you have to do to get there in the end.
No, yes, that's I think something that as an undergraduate you learn more and more.
Yeah, definitely. And you're still learning it when you're a PhD student as well.
Brilliant. And now it's time for a round of quick fire questions, essentially. And these typically have shorter answers, although feel free to go into a bit more depth if you'd like. If we could start off with, what is your favorite type of galaxy?
Oh, my favorite type of galaxy. I really like jellyfish galaxies. I really like jellyfish in general. So when I first heard that jellyfish galaxies existed, I actually have a jellyfish tattoo that's very fresh. But when I found out that jellyfish galaxies existed, I was like, wow, they've got a cool name, but I bet they're boring. But actually what a jellyfish galaxy is as a galaxy is falling into the center of a cluster, it's passing through sort of heated gas. And that heated gas is stripping the gas from inside the galaxy out of the galaxy sort of as a wake behind it. So what you end up with is a spiral galaxy, and then these sort of tentacles of hydrogen gas that have been stripped out behind. And by sort of measuring the direction and the length of these trails, you can work out how fast the galaxy's falling into the cluster and how dense the material it's passing through is, etc. So yeah,
brilliant. Yeah,
I thought it would be a good name, but a boring thing. But it turns out a good name and a good thing.
Yeah, so it's something that both looks really cool and also is probably really useful for research, I can imagine.
Yeah,
amazing.
Yeah.
I guess next question, do you have a favorite book?
So I read this book during lockdown, and it has been my go-to recommendation ever since. So I reckon it's my favorite book. I suppose that qualifies it. And it is called How Much of These Hills is Gold by Pam C. Zhang. And it is a book set in the 1800s, sort of in the frontier in the West in America. And I have always loved the frontier of the West as a setting, but unfortunately any book or media that you want to consume about it is always just the story of a old white man who is doing man things and being a man out there, and that's kind of the story, which is not really that appealing. But this book follows two orphans who are the children of Chinese immigrants who were brought over to build the railroads, and follows the two orphan children of a Chinese family, and also deals with sort of them navigating the world and issues of sort of class and race. And there are also trans and non-binary representation in there, which is from a time period that you don't normally see trans and non-binary representation present. So it was a wonderful book, and I have not stopped recommending it to everyone ever since. So yeah, that's the one.
That sounds really interesting. For the next question, which is sort of a traditional one on the Insight podcast, do you have a favorite music genre and then a favorite song as well?
I am a punk listener through and through. I listen to lots of underground DIY punk from all sorts of places, like Australia. Northwest Indiana, of all places, has a really good scene. And I reckon my favorite song is maybe a song called They Them Theirs. There by the Muslims, who are a queer Muslim punk band from North or South Carolina, one of the two, and kind of sing about their experiences being queer, being trans, being black, being Muslim in the world at large, which is a lot to sing about.
I can imagine.
Yeah, so there talks about just sort of queer joy and sort of community in the face of unsupportive groups.
See your fucking bed. You
have a particular favourite science communicator?
Oh, am I allowed to say two?
Sure, yeah.
Great. So I guess I really, really enjoy listening to Jocelyn Bell Burnell, who I'm sure most people have heard of, because she speaks a lot about her experiences being sort of the only woman to, at her point, have graduated from in physics, and sort of how that experience was. And I'm always, these days, maybe slightly pessimistic when I hear people speak about that experience and how it's going to sort of erase non-binary people. And I remember I sat to listen to Jocelyn speak, and I was like, I really love her work and I really listen to her speak. I hope that she doesn't, say something that's going to maybe put me off her. And I remember she spoke to the Royal Astronomical Society at the National Astronomy meeting about sort of the state of our field and gender representation in our field. And I was like, oh no, this seems like it could be a hurdle. But she had put together the data from the last however many decades on gender representation, and she made a very strong point that the data from the past that she had, she said that they still thought that gender was a binary thing, which we now know is wrong. So that's why they only had male and female data. And in saying that one sentence was enough for me to sort of, I don't know how old Jocelyn Bell Burnell is. I don't want to A, guess and be wrong, or B, reveal. But she is a little older than all of us. So if she can, understand well enough how to make us feel welcome and represent us, then I think anyone can. And it was very good to see. My other favourite is the Astronomer Royal, Catherine Hamans, because she taught the first year astronomy class when I was doing my undergrad at Edinburgh. I don't know if she still does, but I know that she is still in Edinburgh. And I remember she was just so excited about everything and explained things in a way that anyone could understand and could get anyone excited about. And she still, even being the big fancy Astronomer Royal, is still doing that to this day, which is wonderful to see. And I think I might credit her for making me stray into astronomy to begin with. So yeah, wonderful to hear her speak every time.
And then I guess last quickfire question. If you could change one thing about the laws of physics, what would it be?
It would be really helpful if we could actually detect dark matter. It'd make my job a lot easier, I think. Yeah, that might be it. Although I think the universe would look pretty boring if we could see it, because everything would just be blocked out by the dark matter. So if it was detectable, but not in a way that would make all the pretty pictures go away, that would be really handy, really handy.
So like transparent matter, perhaps, or slightly transparent matter.
Yeah, maybe like it emits radiation, but at just a very, very, very specific wavelength that nothing else emits at, so we could like choose to look at it. Yeah, it would make my job a lot easier. Although then I would maybe be out of a job, so maybe I shouldn't. I should be careful what I wish for with that one.
No, that's fair enough. Very good. No, that's brilliant. Well, that brings us to the end of the quickfire questions. So I guess one final question to finish off the interview. Obviously, we've talked a lot about your work at St Andrews currently and your journey to get here. But do you have any particular aims to do with the rest of your PhD and indeed afterwards? I imagine that's probably a question you get a lot.
Yeah, I think that's the taboo question when you're doing a PhD. If someone asks me what I'm planning to do later, it's always, uh-oh. But no, I would love to continue to do research. That would be ideal. I think my time in academia has maybe shown me that doing research in itself, anyone can do it. I've been working from home for 2 years. You don't have to, give up all the other parts of your life to continue to be a good researcher. Unfortunately, the way that academia is structured, they seem to think that it is maybe better that we give up every other part of our life to continue to do research, which I think over the past few years with the pandemic and everything has become more and more arbitrary. To continue after PhD, I would be looking at 6 years in temporary 2-year postdocs, which ideally to be competitive would have to be in a different country each time. And I think there are people who research and their work is more important than any other aspect of their life. But I don't think that we should have to have our life structured that way in order to be good researchers. So my position at the moment is I will apply to postdocs, and if a postdoc comes along which suits me and doesn't make me compromise the other things that I care about in my life, then that's great. but I'm not so attached to academia that I'm going to throw away all the other options in my life and sort of jump through arbitrary hoops just to kind of prove that I'm good enough for academia when, my research speaks for itself. I don't need to show that I can just move to a country every 2 years and work for maybe less pay than I should to show that I'm committed enough to be allowed into academia. So my position at the moment is I would love to keep doing research, but I'm not going to jump through arbitrary hoops to do so. And that's not an issue of me not being good enough for academia. That is an issue of academia not making space for me and people who are not willing to throw away every other aspect of their life.
Yeah.
So it's maybe not the optimism that people would want to hear, but unfortunately that is where academia is at the moment. And I think there is that kind of balance of how much can you change things yourself versus the cost of you being the person to change those things. So ideally, I'd love to stay on in academia, and hopefully a postdoc position comes up that suits me, but I'm not going to do it not in my own way. In the same way that I only started the PhD with the condition that I could live and work in Edinburgh and study in St Andrews. I'm going to do it my own way, and whether they let me do that or not is up to them. So ideally a postdoc. If not, I'm not too attached to anything that I wouldn't want to head off into industry and continue to do wonderful work somewhere else.
Brilliant. No, that's probably a good message to end on. But thank you very much for your time today, Stephanie. It's been really brilliant talking to you, and definitely think it'll be a really great podcast.
Not a problem. It's been lovely chatting.
You've been listening to Insight, the University of St Andrews Physics Society's podcast. Thank you to our wonderful interviewees for sharing their thoughts and insights. This podcast was produced by Muse McKennon, Veronica Sedlakova, and Michael Stanway. To find out more about the Physics Society and what we do, find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or search St Andrews Physics Society for our website. Goodbye.